Sadhu Sundar Singh, Called of God, Chapter 19, Further Experience in Tibet. Quote, Most gladly will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in persecutions and distresses for Christ's sake. Unquote. 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 10. Dr. Falstick, in his Manhood of the Master, says, Jesus made the right attitude towards hostile men, not a negative refraining from vengeance, but a positive saviorhood that prays for them, blesses them, and sacrificially seeks their good. This is the attitude of Sadhu Sundar Singh and all his work in life of suffering among the peoples of Tibet and other hostile states to whom he carries the gospel of Christ. In the course of his addresses, he sometimes gives illustrations from his own experiences. In speaking on the text, he that loses his life shall save it, he told them this amazing story. He was one day making a journey across the mountains in Tibet on a bitterly cold day when snow was falling. Both he and the Tibetan companion who was traveling with him were almost frozen to death and despaired of reaching their journey's end alive. They came to a deep precipice to find a man laying there already dead. Sundar suggests they should carry him to a place of safety, but the Tibetan declined, saying it was all they could do to get into safety themselves, and he passed on his way. With difficulty, the Sadhu lifted the man on his own back and began to struggle forward with his heavy load. Soon the exhaustion brought warmth to him and communicated itself to the helpless body over his shoulders. He had not gone very far when he overtook his Tibetan companion, who had fallen stone dead across the path. Eventually, Sundar arrived at the village, by which time the half-dead man had fully recovered consciousness, and they both thanked God for the lives snatched from the jaws of death. The Sadhu said he had never known a better practical exposition of the words, quote, Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it, unquote. On another occasion, the Sadhu had been climbing over rough crags, C-R-A-G-S, when he came to a cave in which he saw a man praying. In order that he should not fall asleep, the man had tied his long hair to the roof of the cave, and with closed eyes he strove hour by hour to meditate in prayer. Sundar entered the cave and asked the man why he was thus suffering. Like many others, this man had spent most of his life in worldly pursuits, but deep down in his mind there was a haunting fear of a dreadful unknown future. This at length drove him to forsake the world, and he had come to this remote spot in hope of finding satisfaction in prayerful meditation. He explained that no relief had come to his spirit. The Sadhu opened his testament and read to him such words as, Come unto me, and I will give you rest. He proceeded to explain the true way through Jesus Christ. Spellbound, the poor fellow listened to the wonderful words, and at last he jumped up, crying out, Now is my soul at rest. Make me his disciple. Lead me to him. He begged hard for immediate baptism at the Sadhu's hand, but was persuaded to accompany him to the nearest mission station, where he was left in the care of the missionaries for further instruction. Sundar tells of another place where his message had met with great hostility, and the people were converted into friends by an accident. He was climbing a steep mountain when he slipped and fell, and in his fall a large stone was displaced and rolled over the precipitous cliff onto a place beneath. It happened that just where the stone fell, a huge cobra was lying, and he was immediately killed. A boy who was herding cattle saw what had happened and ran to tell the Sadhu, explaining that this very snake had been the cause of some deaths in the valley, so that nobody dared to pass along that road. Then he ran to tell the villagers, who were so impressed and so grateful that they welcomed the Sadhu. And here he had the blessed privilege of making known the love of Christ to the ignorant people. The feet that bled. The rough mountain track had torn his feet, and Sundar sat down to bandage his wounds. Another man traversing the same road and seeing what had happened stopped to ask him how he felt. They entered into conversation, and the stranger learned how that Sundar, for his master's sake, day by day, walked many weary miles to teach people of him whose feet had bled on Calvary. The two men held sweet converse together, for he found that his companion, Tashish, T-A-S-H-I, by name, was an earnest seeker after salvation. But in his quest for truth, he was perplexed with many doubts, and these the Sadhu tried to solve. Tashish afterwards said to him, "Looking at your bleeding feet, something within me seemed to say, there must be some great power behind this happy life of self-denial." And so Tashish urged Sundar to remain with him, and he spent more than a week at his house instructing him and praying with him. Tashish then sent him on to a Lama who was friendly with him and kindly disposed to Christianity. When he returned, he found Tashish full of hope and happiness, for he had found Christ, and now nothing but baptism would satisfy him. All doubts were gone, and Tashish and his family begged that they may now receive baptism. So before leaving, Sundar had the great joy of baptizing Tashish and his whole family, 9 persons in all. Being chief secretary to the Lama of the district and a man of importance, Tashish has not been called upon to suffer for his faith, but he is under strict orders not to persuade others to follow his example or in another way to propagate the new faith. Many times and often, Sadhu Sundar Singh feels the loneliness of soul that must come to all whose entire lives are given to spiritual things. Extreme exaltation of spirit accompanied with tremendous expenditure of nervous power must be followed by moments of reaction. Ordinary missionaries and ministers might find respite in charge of occupation, but not so the Sadhu. His changes are of place, not of work. Day by day, his unwearied search for souls continues, and whether in the churches and convents of Christian or among the non-Christian people, the strain never relaxes. The missionary rightly said of him in Travancore, he must live very near to God to stand it. And that is the true secret of being able to continue. Never impatient, never too weary to meet people who seek him, always gracious and ready night and day for the tasks that fall to him. He is a living copy of his master. Sharing his master's spirit, he also shares his loneliness. Speaking of such a time as this, he tells of a day when he was unusually tired, hungry, and footsore. Utterly dejected, he was painfully drudging along when he was joined by a man who entered into conversation with him, and so led him out of himself that he would forget his misery in the charming companionship of his new friend. They went on together until they came close to a village, when, much to the Sadhu's perturbation, he found himself once more alone. He cannot explain it, but his own words are, "I now know what it was an angel of the Lord sent to strengthen and uphold me in my hour of weakness." And chapter 19 had been read by Peter John Paresis.